This session is on the record. It's being video recorded and will be available on the Net Zero Nuclear YouTube site, which you can follow along using the hashtag NetZeroNuclear. We encourage you to promote this session on your own social media channels, reference it, and reference the work that we're doing and this pavilion is doing over the next 2 weeks at COP. To discuss what is, I think, going to be an increasingly profound issue as nuclear plays an ever larger role in our energy transition goals. We have Amir Adnani, CEO of the Uranium Energy Corporation, Roland Backhouse, Executive Vice President of Global Strategy at Ultrasafe Nuclear, and Scott Melby, CEO of Uranium Royalty Corporation. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us today. I think before we dive into talking about the real theme of the session, which is sustainable mining of uranium and the role that nuclear energy can play in a broader sustainable mining environment, I'd love for each of you to kind of reflect on the events of the past 3 days for the nuclear community. I think we came into this COP really expecting that it was going to be an oil and gas COP, and in so many ways now it's actually become a nuclear COP, which is incredibly important, incredibly profound, a huge development for the nuclear community. Roland, let's start with you. What do you reflect for us on what this moment means for nuclear's role in COP, but also, moving forward? We got a lot to do.
Yeah, happy to do that, and thanks for the invitation. I appreciate it. The shift that we've seen at this COP, most recently yesterday, but even going back a few days, has really been monumental. What we've seen is governments and private industry have come together to align to finally understand that nuclear must have a role in the decarbonization of our energy sector, both behind the meter, grid scale, potentially shipping, and the rest. Renewables can serve a large part of that need, but nuclear must be there. In the high-temperature gas reactor space, USNC manufactures a high-temperature gas microreactor. The goal of that reactor is to decarbonize hard-to-decarbonize sectors, including mining, off-grid, potentially data centers, so behind the fence. And we look forward to being a part of the decarbonization effort more broadly.
Scott, reflections from you as well.
It's interesting because I think we've had a lot of years now to try to move through this green energy transition, and we're finding that it's hard. It's hard to reach those kind of carbon emissions, and I think to some degree we've relied too much on ideology and not enough math and science to get there. The ideology is good. It sets a goal where we want to be, but how we actually achieve that has to be more scientifically based, and there's nothing more math and science than nuclear power, and that really is being recognized by the political left, the political right, industrialists, environmentalists, and you're seeing public opinion changing, and hence you're seeing public policy changing increasingly in favor for nuclear power, like you're seeing with the declarations here at COP.
Amir, any reflections on your end?
Yeah, just really to echo much of what's already been said, I would certainly agree that calling this nuclear COP would be quite appropriate. Nuclear energy has gone from being, on the outside of COP and previous meetings to really being front and center. Here we are at the center of the energy transition pavilion. The pledge to triple nuclear energy was so well received, so much media coverage around it, so much positive discussion around it, not just around the world, but even here in the host nation, UAE, which is a hydrocarbon-rich country, to be so committed to already having brought 4 units online in Abu Dhabi, 4 existing power plants for nuclear energy, but even thinking about and planning to build more. So I think it's certainly a monumental moment for nuclear energy, but at the same time, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that it is driven by demand. Demand as a result of the mega trends of electrification and decarbonization bring to our doorsteps, to the doorsteps of nuclear energy, this very broad acceptance that we have just simply never seen before at this level.
So coming to the topic of our panel, I think, Scott, I want to start with you, because it seems that if we do our jobs right, and take advantage of this moment, a pretty tight uranium market is only going to get tighter, right?
Yep.
Amir, you mentioned the demand signal is now there. You now have a huge policy signal that's only going to stimulate that demand further. How do we think more effectively about increasing the capacity of that uranium supply chain, and also thinking about it in a much more sustainable manner, because it's going to get caught up in this broader conversation around critical minerals and the sustainability of
Yeah.
those supply chains?
Well, listen, the green energy transition relies on mined minerals. We have to get our heads around that. Electric vehicles, batteries, electrification of society needs nickel, cobalt, lithium, copper, and we need uranium. That is the clean fuel that goes into carbon-free nuclear energy. So, yeah, we're going to need to build out additional uranium mines. One of the big advantages of nuclear power, though, is the energy efficiency of uranium. You can get a lot of energy out of a very small package. So in terms of the mines needed to fuel the 438 reactors we have operating around the world, plus the 60, 65 more that are under construction right now, we have a manageable amount of uranium mines that need to be built, but they need to be built. And so we are seeing the uranium market is probably the hottest commodity globally today. It's increased the most year to date, but it's still only getting now to the point that is the incentive price for new mines. But that's why our companies are involved. I manage a royalty company, which is a capital provider to that group of companies around the world, the 8 to 10 mines that are needed by 2030, and multiple more mines that are needed beyond that to meet this demand. And Amir's company, UEC, is an actual company that has mines in jurisdictions like Texas, Wyoming, and Saskatchewan to meet that demand. So markets work, higher prices will stimulate the mine supply. We have to remember that demand for uranium is inelastic, but it's also a bit price insensitive. Uranium is only 5 to 10% the cost of generation in a nuclear power plant. So prices can go from 50 to 80, 100, 150 and not even show up in the rates that the consumer, industrial, or residential might realize. That's a big, big strength of uranium and nuclear power.
Amir, you were referenced by name, so I'm gonna tee you up next. Scott mentioned that you're on the ground working, thinking about building the capacity in these supply chains, dealing with the issues around sustainability. How is your company specifically dealing with these issues? And then I want to turn to Roland and talk a little bit more about how the next gen nuclear side is kind of shaping this environment as well.
Yeah, look, as an entrepreneur, I started Uranium Energy Corp 18 years ago, and in the last few years, we have been the fastest growing uranium company in the world, making significant investments in acquiring mines, assembling teams, and really getting ready to bring the next generation of uranium mines online. And we plan to do that in Texas and Wyoming. And Wyoming, we're very excited about initial new production in the next 6 months into 2024. And so let's talk about now the challenges. The challenges are real. There are supply chain challenges. There are human resource challenges. I have a young family. I can't wait to get home to encourage my 15-year-old and 13-year-old to get in the nuclear business, to get into uranium, because there are decades of positive progress coming, okay? But at this conference, at COP28, there's a pledge to triple nuclear power. But on the supply side, when it comes to labor, when it comes to human resources and materials, no one's made a pledge yet to triple the size of mining engineers and nuclear scientists and the workforce that's needed to get us to those positive demand signals that you see. So we're tackling that head on. We're excited about the chances that we've created, but I have a bit of a first mover advantage. I've been at this for 18 years, building for this moment in time, believing that this was coming. So we're well prepared. But I think at the end of the day, there are a slew of challenges, one of which we haven't even touched on yet. It's really geopolitical. This world today is full of complicated political and geopolitical events that countries need to navigate around sanctions, around transportation, around insurance, as a result of the outsized role that Russia plays in nuclear energy. So look, I'm focused on North American resources. I really believe that in North America and in the US, we need to repatriate the nuclear fuel cycle and stand it up domestically, because at the end of the day, what's the point of investing billions of dollars in nuclear reactors if we can't power them? And that is an investment that is necessary, and that's what Uranium Energy is really focused on singularly.
And I'll just touch on something. I mean, as the head of the Uranium Producers of America, we find it amazing that the United States relies on nuclear power for 20% of its electricity, 1 in 5 homes. But 50% of the fuel for 20% of our electricity is coming from Russia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan. With the events in Ukraine, the appalling events there, it's really laid bare this over-reliance. But the good news is companies like UEC and governments in the United States House and Senate. There's legislation moving its way through Congress. One of the few things, I mean, if you follow American politics, Democrats and Republicans agree on very few things, but they do agree that nuclear power is part of should be part of our energy policy, and they believe in a strong, vibrant, robust domestic American fuel cycle. So we have a lot of wins in our sails right now to make that reliance go away.
And two things, they also agree increasingly on improving the resiliency of supply chains writ large, nuclear supply chain and nuclear fuel cycle, as well as the suite of other renewable energy technologies. And Amir, I do want to come back to your ideas around the human capital supply chain, right? I was in another minerals session earlier today, and we reflected that the only degree perhaps that you see less and less and less of in the United States than a petroleum engineering degree is a geology or a mining engineering degree. And that's going to be a critical human capital pipeline that we need not just for the nuclear ecosystem, but for the rest of our renewable energy targets at large. I do, however, want to make sure we capture the next gen nuclear side of the house. And Roland, this is where I'll turn to you. Can you share more about the growth of MMRs and SMRs, their role in this 3X pledge that we saw yesterday at COP28? But I think importantly, how we should think about the role of next-gen nuclear in the context of these supply chain issues, right? Do they alleviate some of the things we're talking about here, or do they kind of create additional or new edges or challenges that we need to think be a little more creative about or get ahead of the curve on?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. First, ultra-safe nuclear is doing its part to fix the climate crisis, or at least to stave off the climate crisis. USNC, I refer to USNC. USNC has a novel fuel design, which is a fully ceramic fuel, and also a micro-modular reactor, which is a 45 megawatt thermal nuclear battery. Let me talk about the fuel first. The fuel is a TRISO-based fuel, where TRISO stands for tristructural isotropic fuel. So imagine, if you will, a small kernel of uranium-235, about half the size of a poppy seed. We then take that uranium-235 and wrap that in multiple layers of ceramic. We take those little balls, which are now about the size of a poppy seed, and we load those into a silicon carbide matrix to form a fuel pellet. Between the TRISO particles and when loaded into that solid silicon carbide matrix, there's a very, very wide margin to fuel failure, more than 1,000 degrees Celsius. And so what that means is that the fuel is inherently safe. The fuel can take whatever an event might throw at it, be it a normal operating condition, an off a casualty condition, or what have you. So that's the first thing, and I'll talk about why that's important. The second thing is this battery we talked about. We have a high temperature gas reactor, a microreactor. It's important because it is a high temperature reactor. It's cooled by helium. Helium passes that heat from the core to a molten salt heat exchanger to a molten salt storage tank. That molten salt is important because it's at about 545 centigrade, which really allows us to be a heat provider to industrial users of heat. Those can be many, including but not limited to mine. So I'll pause there. USNC can be a game changer in this variety because our goal is to target hard to decarbonize sectors. This could be shipping, this could be behind the fence, this could be mining, and the rest. The reason for that is that our reactors will be manufactured in a reactor assembly facility for the first time. So we're not talking about manufacturing components and subcomponents and assemblies and then shipping them for protracted assembly at the site, as nuclear has done. It has driven up the cost of nuclear for many years. Rather, we'll take those components, assemble them at the factory in Gadsden, Alabama, test them, disassemble them, modularize them, load those full modules into ISO containers, ship those ISO containers to the site, and assemble those ISO containers on site. What that lets us do is it lets us cut down the period of time during which site works are occurring, which minimizes the risk and the associated costs. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the fact that the reactors are small. They're perfect for a mining application, for example. They can be forward deployed on the back of trucks to remote mines. They can be used for the life of the mine. Mines often run for many tens of years. As it happens, so too does MMR with refueling. And they're designed to go in ISO containers. So they're actually designed to get to mines in a way that traditional nuclear would never have been suitable. So that's the third thing. The second thing is this salt loop thing I talked about. The salt loop allows MMR to couple with renewables. Think about it like this. The reactor heats up the helium heats up the molten salt. That helium, that heat is held in the molten salt. When the wind is blowing and the sun is shining, the power can be driven by the wind or the sun at a lower cost. But when the wind dies and the sun isn't shining, MMR can come up online all by itself, passively, to take over the grid. What that lets you do is it lets you take advantage of the low cost of wind and solar. Wind and solar is available. It still gives you 100% grid stability, grid reliability that communities, remote communities especially, need.
Can I follow on to something he said? As an advisor to Colorado School of Mines in Golden, Colorado, I'm fascinated by this marriage between the mining industry and nuclear energy. And if you look at the major mining companies around the world, they're making very significant pledges to go either 30-40% carbon reduction by 2030, maybe 100% carbon neutral by 2050. Well, if they're in a region that has a lot of hydroelectric power or sunny desert regions where solar can play a part, a lot of mines don't have those benefits. And some mining executives will admit that we don't have the technology to go carbon neutral by 2050 for this particular mine in this part of the world. And that's where these microreactors and SMRs can come in and provide that carbon-free source. And the benefit is you've got a Polish copper company, KGHM in Poland, that is going with a small modular reactor at NuScale to not only have uninterruptible carbon-free power, but also be able to put the green copper label on their products as they go to market. And I think this is huge, and this is really going to drive this sector immensely.
You stole my question, because I was just about to get into, what kind of attention is this getting from major miners? But also, I want to take it out of the kind of as an upstream solution in a lot of this, because you're absolutely right. A lot of mines are in places where you don't have that hydro, or you don't have that, that solar that can fully decarbonize. But it's also a midstream issue. When you talk about a copper smelter, you talk about all these midstream refining applications where the location of those applications is dependent on the price of power. And if you're able to deliver that price of power at a low cost with an MMR or an SMR, you've solved a lot of the supply chain issues which kind of economically source those to, whether that be China, to sources of concentration, or, to jurisdictions where you don't really know what the mix of that power grid looks like. I do want to turn to Amir, though, quickly, because we're on this topic of SMRs, right? UEC just announced an MOU with TerraPower. Can you tell us the details of that and what that means for this conversation, not just about how we think about next generation nuclear activities, but to the points that Roland and Scott were making, there are huge advantages in the SMR space. We just kind of got to get them there. So talk to us a little bit about it.
I think one of the interesting trends is my company, Uranium Energy, we're in Texas, Wyoming, and Saskatchewan in terms of the locations we build mines in. In Wyoming, you have an interesting kind of poster child for another trend around SMRs, which is to really convert sites where previously coal-fired power plants used to be, converting coal to SMR or coal to nuclear. It's quite intuitive because, again, the infrastructure, grid connectivity, all of that is there. And Bill Gates' company has proposed to build a unit like this in the state of Wyoming. That's where we're looking to go into uranium production next year. And we're really together view the same strategic imperative, which is, again, the need to be able to back up the decades of future electricity generation from an SMR with locally sourced fuel. So what a beautiful message to be able to source your fuel from your own backyard and to be able to really collaborate in growing the domestic nuclear fuel cycle. I think the elephant in the room really with SMRs, if you're to really appreciate, I think, where the step change is going to come from, is to really pay attention to what NVIDIA is talking about, the chip maker. NVIDIA is talking about shipping 1.5 million servers by 2027 in order to support the demands coming from Silicon Valley for artificial intelligence. That's going to require the same amount of energy as a small country. So think about that for a second. AI is going to reshape energy consumption. And that's, I think, a reason why we're now seeing Silicon Valley really get behind nuclear power and SMRs, because this is the most logical way to really power data centers into the future in a way that is really, as Roland was speaking to, off-grid or behind the fence, provides that sort of high-quality baseload power that is needed, And really, it's the only way to really achieve. And I think this connectivity, connecting the dots between nuclear energy and IT, Silicon Valley and AI, it's something we need to really get our head wrapped around, because it really puts the impetus on us to recognize that we're not just there to support mining and industrial applications. This is the way of the future, and nuclear can really be that important game-changing energy.
Fundamentally, the intensity of our electricity demand is about to go through the roof, and you need that low-cost, flexible power that next-gen nuclear can provide. Taking it back to the supply chain, because, Scott, you made a few really useful comments to this end earlier. You know, we're in an environment where geopolitical risk, supply chain resiliency are all part of the conversation, you know, not just in Congress, but in the EU as well. How is the role of the uranium supply chain beginning to unfold in these discussions around supply chain resiliency? But also, you know, how do you ensure that uranium gets the attention that it needs? Because it is, I mean, the fuel cycle is a highly sensitive, you know, supply chain. It's arguably more sensitive than some of the other things we call critical minerals like copper, which is important, right? I think the copper folks are around here somewhere, so I've got to be kind.
Yeah.
But how do you elevate this? And how do you get policymakers to think thoughtfully and seriously about the fuel cycle and the uranium supply chain?
Well, I mean, I think there's nothing like these horrible events over 2 years ago in Ukraine with the Russian invasion that really kind of highlighted vulnerability in critical minerals, energy commodities, even pharmaceuticals, medical supplies, sharing, you know, kind of outsourcing those to countries that may not share our values. We all believe in international trade. International trade makes the world go around. But there are some things that are maybe too important to outsource. And I think, you know, the world presently consumes about 200 million pounds of uranium a year from 438 reactors. We're presently producing about 150 million. The gap has been significant, 50 to 70 million pounds a year for the last 5 or 6 years. And we've had sufficient inventories that were built up after Fukushima that have kind of moderated the price increase. Now those inventories are beginning to be depleted, and now it's time to build new mines again. So we're really in that phase. I think the good news is that, you know, I don't think the U.S. just has to supply the U.S. needs. I think, you know, the Western Europe, Canada, U.S., you know, Western markets can combine together with European, Canadian, Australian, American suppliers to fuel that supply chain. And I think the price signals, uranium investments are some of the most attractive investments in the mining sector right now. So capital is flowing. We're seeing big generalist investors, hedge funds coming in and investing in the uranium space. And so companies like UEC and other companies like we're investing in at Uranium Royalty are going to meet that gap. Now, in this bifurcation of markets, you know, China and Russia probably get Kazakhstan, which is the largest supplier of uranium in the world today. So, you know, that may go more into their sphere of the world. But we've got major mines in Australia, Canada, the United States. We've got 1 billion pounds of known and likely resources in the western United States that have really been underutilized. We have low impact, environmentally friendly technologies like in situ recovery that is just can be a darling of ESG and sustainable mining in terms of this low impact on environment and positive community impact. So I'm optimistic we're going to get there. Is there going to be higher uranium prices for a bit until that market moderates? But we've gone from a place where we had oversupply in uranium to undersupply, but we've got to get back building mines. The good news is we don't need a lot of mines. We just need a good number of mines to get back to that supply and demand balance, but it may take some time.
I want to do another round robin and bring it all back to COP, right? I think you have this 3X pledge, right, which is fantastic. It's a game changer. I think now we move forward to implementation and action, right, really making that 3X happen. You know, when we think about what we've discussed just over the last few minutes, right, around the value of next-gen nuclear to these high-intensity, hard-to-abate power sectors, sectors of demand, right? When we think about the needs now of the uranium supply chain, it's joining a critical minerals discussion, which is really only nascent in the COP discussion. but then also the value that nuclear as a community has in learning how to express its value from an ESG perspective. Engaging, the arc of nuclear's engagement in the COP is actually a fascinating story in its own right. But to put that all together, Roland, we'll start with you. Reflect on these issues and how we move them forward from this great pledge we saw yesterday.
It's a great point. And I'll touch again on the supply chain issue. There are two issues maybe, financing and supply chain. Nuclear is a capital-intensive, upfront loaded industry. It's true in the mining space for uranium. It's true in reactor fabrication, engineering, licensing, what have you. There's a huge initial hurdle for a number of reasons. Financing needs to flow into the industry to support that in a targeted, smart, even keel, long-term type of a way. If we don't do that, all the climate pledges in the world and goodwill and what have you aren't going to get us over that hub. They can't do it, which basically means we're not going to be able to meet our carbon goals. So that's the first thing. The second thing is more to the supply chain piece of it. Nuclear involves supply chains which are largely unique to nuclear. Apropos to mining and also high temperature gas reactors, of which USNC's MMR is but one, we use graphite. Other high temperature gas reactors use graphite, either in a graphitic ball or a solid state matrix or what have you. It happens that there aren't a lot of graphite mines in the world that manufacture and can ultimately produce what's called nuclear grade graphite, which is a very low boron concentrate graphite. Now, industry has done some good looking at where these choke points are in the nuclear space. I would encourage people, investment on the one hand, or policymakers or activists or what have you, to assess these historical reports and figure out how to loosen those choke points. Because if we don't loosen those choke points and we don't get the right financing in, the capital in the very near future, again, all the goodwill and climate pledges in the world just can't get it done.
Your point in particular about graphite, right, brings up, I think, an important point when we talk about the role of critical mineral supply chains writ large in the energy transition. Not forgetting that, it's not just about uranium in a lot of ways, right? There are any number of other, parts of what we call critical transition minerals, which now need equal attention for the nuclear community as it continues to seize a role in the transition. I had meant to reverse my round robin, but I failed at that, so I am going to skip Scott and go to Amir. Amir, how do we carry this conversation forward from the COP? How do we implement the successes that we saw over the past couple days, but with particular attention to the role of the supply chain and next-gen nuclear in those commitments?
I think we charge our batteries, we look at each other as an industry, and we say, this is the moment we were waiting for. It's a humongous opportunity, and let's just go tackle it, bottom line, right? And I think, we're supposed to talk about sustainable uranium mining. I'll just touch on that, and I think it speaks to the issues that you raised. We're taking the first step in our industry to basically unveil what will become the first ever net zero uranium mine. That is completely disclosed in terms of how we're achieving that in our inaugural sustainability report, a follow-on sustainability report. All of this is on our website at uraniumenergy.com. And it really is full of everything we've talked about here. We're giving out high school science and math scholarships to the local communities that we're in, investing for decades to come because it starts at that level. Creating those relationships with universities in the areas that we're in, that's all addressing the human resource side of the equation. Working with local contractors. If we have a lot of need for drilling, you can't find drillers anymore. We're working and providing commitment to our contractors and consultants to say, we see longevity and growth here. Invest in your business so you can support our business for years to come as a key integral supplier. And really just getting out there and saying that we've never seen this much runway than what was being presented to us at COP today. Tripling 2050. Yes, Roland's 100% right. This is a long-term capital-intensive business. But what else do we need than an almost 25-year, 30-year time horizon with a tripling? That's the policy signal that we needed. We commit to proper, sustainable way of building these businesses from net zero uranium to net zero nuclear, emission-free nuclear. This is going to be the coolest industry on the planet with exceptional return for shareholders and lots thousands and hundreds of thousands of meaningful jobs that are going to be created in the process as well. I think everyone's going to win.
I think you put it absolutely perfectly in that what we saw over the past several days created a massive runway. Right now it's about building the ecosystem, part human capital, part industrial partnerships, part resource allocation, right, to take advantage of that runway. Scott, I'll finish up with you. Kind of, how do we move this all forward?
Yeah, I mean, one area we didn't talk about was regulatory. If we think of in past years, some of the big challenges we felt in the nuclear industry was regulatory challenges and extended permitting and licensing times. Well, what happens in this environment when the political left and the political right actually agree that we need nuclear power, we need the uranium nuclear fuel cycle, and instead of working at odds with each other to slow walk or impede the licensing of new nuclear power plants or uranium mines, they both see eye to eye. And the same is true in critical minerals, and we're seeing governments really come alongside and support that development through not lessening the bar that mines and nuclear plants have to meet. We have to maintain that highest level of safety, health, environment, but just expediting the speed at which governments license and review these plants and get them into production. Because I think the industry can do it. I think we're going to have a lot less impediments from the government side. So it's very important. I mean, the young people that are here advocating in their particular countries to their governments that they support nuclear power. We all can and play a role, and I know we're doing it at the government level, but it also needs to be done at the community level, and talk to your neighbors about nuclear power, and if they have fears, I think we can convince them that nuclear power is a great baseload, carbon-free source of power that can complement wind and solar. It can be a nice hedge against the volatility of natural gas prices, and obviously can move us off of, say, coal-fired power generation in the coming years.
You were winding up like this was the last question, but it's not. Surprise. We got one more round robin just to kind of really cap this off. And Amir, I will actually start with you on this time around. And it's, again, past 2 days, you had a busy first chunk of the COP, right? Looking ahead to the balance of these 2 weeks, right? What do you, in 30 seconds or less, what do you hope to see come out of this COP that would really advance the nuclear agenda in one way or the world, knowing that you got a pretty good win early on?
Well, listen, I think as far as I understand, and you can correct me, but the pledge to the 3X that we keep talking about, I believe it's currently open for more signatures. So maybe over the next 2 weeks, the number of 22 countries or more that have pledged, maybe that number goes up, number one. Number two, would love to see the World Bank step in and start to talk about funding that they can provide as well, or provide that eligibility at the World Bank level. Seeing that alignment to go from a pledge to, again, the fact that both Scott and Roland talked about the capital-intensive regulatory nature of the industry. Well, again, here we are at COP, and again, key government officials are here, key intergovernmental organizations are here. Would be wonderful to see a bit more of the granularity that is needed beyond the pledge, maybe come together in the next 2 weeks that gives us even more strength to carry this momentum forward.
I appreciate you stopping short on regulatory, because I think if we say permitting 3 times, all the congressional staffers are going to flee the entire COP. Scott, let's your thoughts. What, whether it's additive or reinforcing some of Amir's comments, what do you hope to see over the next 2 weeks?
So the world leaders are here making this pledge. My hope is that now can filter down through the government agencies into the people who are actually making decisions in energy, in electricity, and can start to execute on these world leaders' vision. And I think they have the marching orders, and that's why these COP28 is so important, to set those goals. And now industry, policymakers, politicians, but also the people in the agencies within the countries, they're going to make this dream a reality.
Roland, bring us home.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, I'm going to disappoint you with your point about regulatory. The governments around the world have been working on regulatory harmonization plans for decades. The effort behind that, the motivation to do it, has sort of ebbed and flowed during that time. We need to get there. The fact of the matter is it needs to get there. Some countries going to have to lose a little bit of national pride to get there. Other countries may pick up some. I suspect, though, at the end of the day, we're going to have safe reactors deployed around the world. So we need to have that as a focus. We have to stop a lot of the regulatory nuances that could really prevent or really drive up the cost of the global distribution of advanced reactors.
I think that's all the time we have for tonight. But gentlemen, thank you. A lot to be said here about what will actually be a transformative moment. We hope to be a transformative moment, but I actually think will be a transformative moment for nuclear. So much to talk about still on building the supply chain, thinking about that supply chain and the security of the supply chain, but in a sustainable manner as well. All of the financing needed to bring that to bear, but importantly, to your point, Roland, I'll say permitting, just to finish the job. But making sure that policy can be an enabling force for all of this and not a handicap. With that, I'd like to thank our panelists with a brief round of applause. And